voisin kysyä magneettisesta kolloidinesteestä, niin näenkö mä oikein, että jakautuuko se aina niin kuin 3 se pisara?
Se jakautuu usein 3, ei aina. Eli sä näet siellä näiden 2 ison pisaran välillä tämmöisen, mitä me kutsutaan satelliittipisaraksi.
Okei. Mulle tuli mieleen se spagetin taivuttamisilmiö, kun se hajoaa melkein aina 3, ei tosin aina. Niin, onko tämä samankaltainen selitys?
Tämä on mielenkiintoinen kysymys. Siitä spagetistahan oli Hesarissa ihan vastajuttu. Mä en ole ihan varma, että liittyykö nämä toisiinsa. Mä lähtisin argumentoimaan tässä tapauksessa sen pienen pisaran muodostumista sillä, että jos me lasketaan siihen tavallaan pisaraan kohdistuvia voimia tässä näiden 2 ison pisaran välissä, niin siinä ei ole voimaa mihinkään suuntaan. Eli siinä on jonkinnäköinen tendenssi tälle pisaralla jäädä tähän väliin. Et siinä kun se pisara lähtee halkeamaan 2, niin siinä muodostuu jonkinnäköinen tämmöinen kaula, nestekaula. Ja siihen nestekaulan ihan keskikohtaan ei kohdistu voimaa mihinkään suuntaan. Ja sen takia siihen jää sitten pieni pisara.
Okay.
Joo.
Mä voisin kysyä sinulta kysymyksen, jos se on sallittua. Mä ihmetettiin vähän, kun oli se magneettipisara ja sitten oli merkattu se magneettikentän suunta, että se on niin kuin, että se ylhäältä se magneetti ilmeisesti jotenkin veti, eikö niin, että siinä oli se nuoli, että kun sehän niin kuin piteni sinne ylöspäin, että eikö se ollut, että se magneetti oli siellä niin kuin yläpuolella, kun sitten mun hämmensi se, että sitten kun oli se kuva, missä näytettiin sitä tutkimusasetelmaa, niin siinä oli se pisara ja sitten se magneetti olikin sen alla. Sitten mä ihmetin, jos se magneetti on alla, niin kuin, että jos se on tämän alla, niin miten se toimii? Joo,
toi notaatio, mitä me käytetään tuossa, että toi nuoli tuossa kuvassa näyttää sen magneettikentän suunnan. Se ei indikoi sitä, että missä suunnassa se magneetti on.
Okei, että se ei korreloi välttämättä sen kanssa. Okei. Eli tässä, missä se magneetti täällä sijaitsee, siis fyysisesti?
Se on fyysisesti tuon pisaran alapuolella tässä, ihan niin kuin nähtiin siinä myöhemmässä vaiheessa.
Sitä kenttää pystyy osoittamaan sitten sinne, okei.
Joo.
Jännää.
Sulla oli niissä viitteessä, niin joko niitä oli pohjoismainen, ainakin lehti. Minkä verran suomalainen tilanne poikkeaa erikoisesti pohjoismaista tai meidän muista verrokkimaista tässä?
Tässä perheyhdistämisasiassa.
Niin, perheyhdistämisessä. Sitten meillä on myöskin perheen erottamista.
Yeah, maybe I answer in English so that the non-Finnish speakers. So he asked how the situation on family reunion, how it differs from other Nordic countries, and also said like family separation, how that differs. Well, so among the Nordic countries, the one that is infamous for having a very strict policy is Denmark. So Denmark has actually, not only in the Nordic countries, but internationally, rather strict policies on family reunion, and they have had them for quite a while. One thing that caused a lot of discussion at the time was when Denmark introduced an age limit for marriage migration. You had to be 24, which means that if you are a student and you are under 24 and you go abroad as a Danish person and you meet someone else and you want to bring that person back to Denmark through marriage, it's not possible if you are younger than 24 years old. And the argumentation behind that policy at the time was that through this they try to prevent forced marriages to happen, that if people who have parents who have migrated to Denmark, for example, and if they kind of want to force their children to marry someone from their home country, then that if they're older they can resist this force better. But anyhow, so in Denmark we have rather strict policies. There's also an attachment policy that has a joint attachment. So anyway, so Denmark is rather strict. And then in Norway, the problem is that the income requirement is really, really high. So Norway has also other policies, but the one that is kind of very, of course, the salaries are also higher in Norway. But even if you take into account that people in Norway earn more, it is very, very high. And then kind of Finland and Sweden have been like, if you look at these countries, they have been like not as strict maybe as Norway and Denmark. But then in recent years, what has happened is that requirement, both in Sweden and in Finland, have become stricter and stricter. And in a way, what is happening right now, as you said in your question, can we speak of family reunion or is it rather family separation? What is happening is that it's a bit of like a race to the bottom. You kind of have this, who can make the strictest policies that still somehow are in accordance with human rights regulations. And at least the lawyers that I've talked to and people who are legal scholars say that they are quite sure that Finland will face court cases by the European Court of Human Rights. And for example, one thing where Finland actually faced this court case was because before the requirement that the child had to be under 18, so before it was like that you had to be under 18 at the time when you leave the application. But then they changed it and said, no, you have to be 18 at the time when the decision is made. And as we all know, the workings of the immigration bureaucracy is really slow. So if you leave the application when you're 16 or 17 and then it takes a long time, then you might turn 18 before you get the decision, and then suddenly you can't get your parents to Finland anymore, or if you are a parent in Finland, your child can't come to Finland anymore. And actually there, the European Courts of Human Rights, they interfered and they said this is not in accordance with the right of the child, the best interest of the child, and with the respect for family life and all these articles. So now actually this has to be changed in Finland. So in a way it seems that Finland has become stricter. It didn't used to be as strict, but it has become much stricter in recent years. But with some of the things we have to see. Another thing is that even if the policies have not become stricter, the way that kind of some regulations are working have made it more difficult. So for example, before you were able to leave your application in Finland. So in Finland, if you're living in another country, your relative or your partner in Finland could leave the application here for you. But now the person who wants to come to Finland has to personally go to the nearest embassy because of this regulation that you have to leave your fingerprint on the application. And because of these biometrical applications, it has become much more difficult. And what I explained earlier, that people have to travel to another country, they sometimes might not have the money to go there, they might not get a visum to go there legally. So this, even if this is not like the law becoming stricter, but these regulations on how the application procedure take place has in effect then made the number decline very strictly. And another thing is also the implementation. So what I looked at is when I talked to the immigration officers, so it seems that in some regards, for example, for unaccompanied minors, like virtually in the past years, the numbers have gone down so sharply that children are not, these days, I've talked to researchers who work with children, migrant children, and they actually are getting advice from the social workers to not even apply. So these unaccompanied children in Finland, they don't even try to get their families here because they know it's virtually impossible to get a positive decision. But the problem is, of course, if they don't even apply, then you cannot take it to court, and this cannot be, I mean, we don't really even know that how strict, but the system has there kind of become stricter, and the policy has not really changed. But then the way it's implemented, it has become stricter. So in a way, that is also what's taking place. But in general, I would say that Finland before was maybe not as tight as other countries, but now has kind of caught up, and especially since the income requirement has even been introduced for people with refugee backgrounds. So before, kind of refugees were always treated as a separate category and thought, okay, their family life has to be protected, especially because, I mean, you know, for them, their families live in dangerous situations. They have, if we argue that the father gets asylum, then of course the rest of the family should get asylum too, I mean, through the father. And now that doesn't work that way anymore, at least automatically, through this income requirement. And this, I think, has been a major change. And this is not only a Finnish phenomenon, but this takes place in other countries as well. Yeah.
So somehow related to this previous question, how much do you think these regulations can be decided like internally in Finland? And for example, this picture of a correct family, is it something that we can decide here, or are there some international regulations that kind of guide this like process?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we have the EU regulation on family reunification. There's a directive, it's called the EU Directive on Family Reunion. And in this directive, there are some standards that are defined for European member states. And so in a way there, you can't Like there's a certain, but the thing, what has happened with this directive is that the idea behind it was to ensure a minimum of rights. So even in countries where the policies are really, really strict, or where families don't have a lot of rights to reunite, that the directive argues, okay, these at least have to be secured. But the problem is what has happened, like countries like Finland, and certain political powers in Finland have used this directive in order to make policies more stricter. So if Finland had more favorable policies on some of the points in there, they suddenly said, oh, it says in the directive that there can be a housing requirement. Finland doesn't have a housing requirement. Maybe we should introduce a housing requirement. I mean, meaning like that you have to have a certain size of apartment or something. So actually the current government and their governmental plan, they had had plans to make the policies stricter and some of the things they took from this EU directive. But actually that's against the spirit of the directive, and it says in the explanations on how this directive should be used, it says that this shouldn't be used to make policies stricter, but to protect families. But the problem is that what happens actually in real life politics is that people use this directive and say, well, we have to conform to EU regulations. You know how many policies, when they are introduced, people say, we can't do anything, this is EU regulations that we have to. And actually in this case, it's not really true, because they don't have to. The countries can have more favorable policies. This is just to ensure a minimum level that everyone should follow. So actually what has happened is that these common regulations that we have are being used against families, even though they should be used the other way around.
Yeah, I think it's quite intriguing, the difference you said between family courts and for father being around, and basically the courts where they do the immigration and they say, oh, father doesn't have to be around. Do you have any idea why? Because I assume it's not the same judges that do that. So I suppose that there are judges that do the family cases and there are judges that do the immigration cases. So why there is this difference?
Yeah, that's I'm not a legal scholar, so my background is in political history and in gender studies, so I'm not a legal scholar, so probably legal scholars would know this better. Because, what we exactly argue with my colleague is that when we look at these other cases, and in both cases, the best interest of the child should be the kind of guiding. So every decision that affects children, the best interest of the child has to be evaluated. But interestingly, as you also said, in cases where it's about Finnish children of both parents who are Finnish citizens, there the best interest of the child is evaluated very largely and broadly, and how their well-being and school and all of these factors that influence it. And then in these cases for the Aliens Act, even for the non-Finnish children, the same apply. They have to take into account the best interest of the child. But there suddenly the evaluation is done very sloppy, very it's just mentioned that, also considering the best interest of the child, blah, blah, blah. It's just mentioned, but they don't really look at what does this mean for the child if they are being sent back to this country, or what does it mean if they have to, after years and years of going to school in Finland, suddenly leave everything behind and have to go to a country where they don't even speak the language and all that. So, and also what you said about the separation from the fathers. So when I talk to legal scholars, they to me say, well, of course these are evaluated differently, because one of the cases are the Alien Act cases and the other one are Child Welfare Act cases. But then to me, as a kind of non-lawyer or non-legal scholar, I'm like, well, but why differently? I mean, it's the same children and the same best interest of the child that should be evaluated in both. So in a way, it's a bit contradictory. And also, as you said about the role of fathers, why is it suddenly? I mean, I think, in effect, I think the rationale behind this is that in the Aliens Act, if other factors override, and for example, the income requirement always overrides. So if the family can't meet the income requirements, so even if there's a lot of tears and separation and hardship, this is such a strong kind of this is kind of legally argued as being such a strong kind of indicator that even if there's officially the possibility to kind of make an exception, this is not done very often. And in a way, this also comes back to your question, how much can you nationally decide, how much is there? So I think that's one question. The other question is, how much does the law define, and how much leeway do courts or do immigration officers have to kind of, and I think what is happening now is that even if there would be a possibility to kind of take the law and implement it more favorable to the people, what is now being done is that it's been treated as strict as possible, or that there's like one possibility of being able to send so in a way that people want to have less and less people coming to Finland and kind of reduce the numbers. And so at least from me as a scholar, when I look at the cases, that's how it looks like. That, of course, if we talk to people who do this for a living, they probably wouldn't argue that we try to separate families by all means. And when you talk to the people who do it, they say, no, we just follow the law. But from what I look at it, it seems like, well, the law would give you the possibility to make exceptions in these and these and these cases. Why don't you do it? So, yeah.
Kysyisin pehmeän fysiikan sovellusmahdollisuuksista. Mulle on heti ilmeistä, että miksi me haluaisimme tietää, miten tällaiset pienet levähiukkaset järjestäytyvät. Tavallaan, onko tämä enemmän teoreettinen ala vai löytyykö tälle käytännön sovelluksia?
Kyllähän tälle löytyy käytännön sovelluksia, jos ei mennä siihen leväesimerkkiin, joka on hieman teoreettinen, mutta niin kuin pehmeän aineen fysiikallehan on sovelluksia niin kuin lähtien liikkeelle ruokateollisuudesta, miten prosessoidaan ruokia, miten prosessoidaan proteiineja, miten voisin kuvitella, että kun on näitä kaikkia uusia ruokia nyt tulossa, niin kuin mitä mä en halua mainostaa mitään, mutta ensimmäinen mikä tulee mieleen on nämä nyhtökaurat sun muut, niin millä tavalla näitä voidaan prosessoida, mitä pitää tietää niiden rakenteesta, että me voidaan prosessoida ne sillä tavalla, että ne on mahdollisimman miellyttäviä syödä, sanotaan nyt vaikka näin. Sitten sovelluksia löytyy niin kuin kosmetiikasta, pesuaineista, kaikista tämmöisistä. Sieltä löytyy hyvin paljon erilaisia kolloidipohjaisia materiaaleja. Ja millä tavalla saadaan niin kuin joku, sanotaan vaikka kasvovoide, pysymään niin kuin hyvänä mahdollisimman pitkään. Et siellä on myös kaikennäköisiä emulsioita, jotka on kolloideja. Ja siellä on myös jonkinnäköisiä pisaroita toisessa väliaineessa. Ja miten sun täytyy hallita sitä pisaran pintakemiaa niin, että ne ei tartu toisiinsa ja valahda sinne pohjalle, vaan pysyvät dispergoituneina. Löytyy paljon sovelluksia.
So for you, this sounds a lot like chemistry, also your example. So what's the main benefit of looking this like from physics perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we look at these systems from the physics perspective, we try to see the essentials there. Okay, let me put it that way. So I mentioned this necessity of controlling the surface chemistry of the particles. Okay, so you can put different kinds of chemical groups with different kinds of chemical bonds onto the surface of the particles to render them, for example, negatively charged. Okay, so then the small details about like which kind of a chemical group actually gives this negative charge and how is it exactly bonded to the particle becomes at least partially irrelevant when you think about the interactions between the particles. But you're right, the chemistry is there, and I didn't pay enough respect to the chemistry in this presentation. Many of these systems require fair understanding of chemistry, how to synthesize these magnetic nanoparticles, for example, and so on.
I have again a question to you. I was wondering, and this again might be because I'm not in this field at all, so that might be a stupid question, but of course there are no stupid questions, so I will ask it anyway. So I was wondering when I listened to your presentation, and you first presented us with milk, and then with the magnetic kind of, and then at the end we had the algae, you called it algae? Mm-hmm. And then I was thinking, this is really interesting that you actually can take like living organisms and then non-living organisms, and organisms is not the right, non-living matter, and then living organisms, and that you can kind of apply similar methods and get similar results, and And then I was wondering, what's the meaning of life? I was going to ask. It sounds a bit. So what role does the fact that some of the substances or kind of things that you analyze are actually living organisms and others are not? What is the difference between them for the work that you do? Are they just like, oh, we have these what do you call them, the clusters that they built, what is the English word for it? The ones that when they form these clusters, kind of.
Some sort of a collective state.
Yeah. So do they just behave differently, or is the fact that they are kind of alive, does that somehow change things, that the way that you work with them and the kind of results that you get in all of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's something that we would like to dig deep into. So if we have different kinds of active particles from nature, these Chlamydomonas microalgae that use certain kind of a breaststroke, kind of a swimming motion to make them propel, and then there are bacteria that use this kind of a helical corkscrew kind of things, and they use those to move around. And then we have synthetic active particles that have some sort of chemical propulsion mechanism. So the question indeed that we are very much interested in is that, does it matter? Does it matter how the propulsion is created, or will the end result be the same for all these different propulsion approaches? So can we really forget about the biological machinery inside them, and they are just particles that move somehow, and they do all the same things? And the answer is that we don't know at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the consensus around the world, and I think that there's some results that tell that there's a difference if you have these flagella in front of your body, that you do this kind of a swimming, or whether you have the propeller in the behind of you, right? So because in the breaststroke case, when this kind of active particle meets a surface, it's the flagella that meet the surface first, whereas in the ones with the propeller in the back, it's the main body of the cell that meets the object first. And it looks like that makes some differences in the behavior.
Okay, let's take this one. I have a question.
Do you see, so to Jaakko's question as well, so do you see phenomena similar to plasma physics? So of course I think first in the magnetic colloids, but maybe in others, so like phenomena like magnetosonic waves or in that style. I
think I do not know enough about plasma physics to give an answer to that one. But I can tell you that there are interesting connections from soft matter systems to more classic and more theoretical physics. And what could I mention now? For example, you can go to YouTube and you will find the group of Professor Bush, I believe, from MIT, who does experiments where he has silicon oil droplets, and he's got then a pool of silicon oil, and then he's got a single silicon oil droplet that he places on the liquid surface. And normally you would think that, okay, they will coalesce together immediately, right? But when you vibrate the bottom pool of the silicon oil, this droplet actually will not coalesce, and it stays on top of it, and there's a thin layer of air between the droplet and the liquid pool. Okay. And they see phenomena that when they put like multiple droplets on this kind of a vibrating silicon oil surface, they see behavior in the motion of the droplets that they say is somehow similar to the quantum mechanical behavior of particles. They create some sort of waves on the surface, and it resembles very much the Schrödinger equation and quantum mechanics. There are interesting connections like this. Whether there is a connection to the plasma physics, I do not know.
Well, towards the end, I would have a question for both of you. Mainly on what size of communities you have in Finland in your areas. How did you happen to go there, and where are the hot spots in the world in your areas?
You talk to me now?
Both.
Both?
You can choose who answers first.
You want to start?
So can you repeat? So what?
Just to tell us, I mean, this what type of research community you have in Finland?
About the topic that we
where and also where in the world?
Okay. Well, if we speak about this family reunion just as a very small subtopic of migration scholarship, then this is something that when I started working on this, 2010, something like that, 11, there was hardly anyone doing it in Finland. There was 1-2 scholars who worked on the topic, but not very many. And it was something that when I talked to people, they were like, what? And family, sorry, what did you say? They didn't even know what I was really speaking about. But then, as time has gone by, the topic has become very politicized and very much spoken about also in public, and then also research in Finland has emerged much more around this topic. So now we are a kind of group of several researchers who work on these questions, which is great. So there are legal scholars and there are sociologists and there are people who work, for example, on DNA, how DNA testing is part of family reunion. There was a big project around that, an international one, where there were scholars from Finland participating there. So in a way, this topic of family reunion and marriage migration, there is a very nice community. There's an email list for scholars who work on this field, who share kind of information and insights, and who, do conference panels together and kind of cooperate in many other kinds of way. So I feel that many of them are in Great Britain. So I mean, they're in Great Britain, and then also in the Netherlands, there's quite a lot of scholarship around this topic. So it seems that at least in Europe, these I would say are kind of 2 places where you would find quite many kind of well-known scholars who work in this field. And in Finland, if you talk about migration research in general, we of course have here in the University of Helsinki, there's CERN, at the Swedish School of Social Science at SOSCOM, and there are very, very many migration scholars who work on borders and on migration and on issues around that. So I would say that and then there's the Institute of Migration in Turku, and there are many scholars working on these topics. So I would say that these are maybe two places where at the moment there's a lot of migration scholarship going on. In a way I really like the fact that because it's such a, and we also talked about at the end of the presentation, that it's kind of an interdisciplinary field, or that you have several, that it's part, as someone said, it's chemistry, there's biology, there's all that. So also migration scholarship, of course, we have people from very many different kind of academic backgrounds and people who work together, who are anthropologists and political scientists and legal scholars and psychologists and all other kind of fields that you can kind of do things together and explore things together. And even I can kind of cooperate with people who haven't worked on migration, but on families, and understandings of families, even in a national context. So in a way, this kind of topic opens up many kind of possibilities to engage in wider research communities, which is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so in Finland we have at least some activities in this field in the Aalto University and University of Helsinki. Especially in Aalto we have a number of different experimental groups working on different aspects of soft matter mostly. Some groups that focus on this kind of capillary phenomena like this one. Some groups that focus more on a bit more solid-like but still soft materials. And then there are groups that try to find new kind of soft materials from nature, some bioproducts and this kind of a thing. And a couple of groups doing simulational work and theoretical work on this kind of systems. But it's mostly on the soft matter physics. There's quite little activity on the active matter side in Finland at the moment. In the University of Helsinki side, there is some theory groups, I believe, that do quite a lot of computational analysis, molecular dynamics of different structures in cells and try to link those to the experimental studies at Helsinki University. These are the ones that I know of and I think are the biggest strongholds in Finland. I hope I'm not excluding anyone by this statement. Then there is plenty of groups around the world doing soft matter physics, an enormous number. You can almost every, well, not really every physics department in every university has something going on related to this, but quite a large number does have. And active matter is typically, it's a topic that is nowadays appearing in these old soft matter groups. They are becoming interested in this concept that you can have these active systems and they can be much more interesting than the old passive systems, and there's interesting things to be discovered.
Maybe we are ready to thank the speakers.